The last time my family saw me, they laughed when I showed up in uniform. My sister raised her glass and said, "Lighten up, Elise, you're not at war here." Everyone laughed with her. Everyone except me. What they didn't know was that I had just come from identifying the bodies of 2 soldiers who never made it home. And in that moment, standing there surrounded by my own blood, I realized I had fought battles across oceans. Yet this table was where I truly lost my place. My name is Elise Montgomery, and the night my sister mocked my uniform was the night I stopped trying to belong. I used to think I had mastered silence, the kind that fills the sky after a mission when every engine hum fades into nothing, the kind that hangs in a command tent right before the order to move. But there's another silence, colder, sharper, the kind that settles between family members who have stopped wanting to know you. 18 years in uniform had trained me to live with solitude, yet the flight to Austin unsettled me in a way combat never had. Not because of the altitude, but because of where I was headed my mother's birthday dinner. The first time we'd all be in the same room in 2 years, the young officer sitting beside me talked with the bright certainty of someone who still believed rank could fix everything. He spoke of one day earning the Silver Eagles. I smiled and let him keep his dream. He didn't look at me and see that I already wore them. People rarely did. When the plane landed, my phone buzzed. "Dinner at 7. Don't be late." Jasmine booked the restaurant. No greeting, no warmth, just logistics. I stayed in my seat a moment longer, watching the red light sink behind the Texas clouds, thin streaks of fire, cutting through gray like a sky, still remembering war. I told myself I'd survived worse. I could survive this. But as I stepped into the dry Austin Air suitcase in hand, the truth pressed in. I'd fought enemies who wanted me dead, yet tonight I was walking toward the only ones who'd ever made me feel invisible. Jasmine and I never belonged to the same world, even when we shared the same roof. She was light, soft, effortless, and adored. I was the shadow behind it, the quiet one who read too much and smiled too little. People loved her laughter. They tolerated my silence. Our father used to tease, "You should smile more, Elise." People don't like serious girls. I tried for a while, forcing the corners of my mouth to rise, but no one noticed. Eventually, I stopped pretending. When I was accepted into the Air Force Academy at 18, my mother said only, "At least you'll have discipline." There was no celebration, no proud hug, just polite acknowledgement, like I'd chosen a respectable inconvenience. Jasmine didn't come to see me off. She said airports made her anxious. I left home without a goodbye, watching other families wave through glass as I boarded a bus that would change my life. The first postcard I sent home was never answered. The money transfers I made for my father's medical bills went unmentioned, except for the photo Jasmine posted her hand on his shoulder, captioned, "So lucky to care for my parents." I learned that my silence made their comfort easier. They could forget me without guilt. So I threw myself into work. I led training drills in the desert, directed operations that never made the news, and signed reports under flickering fluorescent lights in tents that smelled like sand and sweat. During a humanitarian mission in Syria, I pulled an injured American officer out of a collapsed building. Months later, he became the Deputy Secretary of Defense. He once told me, "One day you'll change how this place sees women." I didn't believe him until years later when a letter arrived offering me a position in Washington, D.C., as strategic advisor to the National Defense Council. I never mentioned it to my family, not because it was secret, but because I knew they wouldn't ask. In my family, silence wasn't absence, it was comfort, for them. I just didn't realize then that my silence would one day become the sharpest weapon at the dinner table. For the past 2 years, I'd known Jasmine only through screens. She'd become the glowing face of a cosmetics brand, a polished voice at women's conferences, preaching self-love and empowerment. I'd seen her on morning shows, her smile perfectly, rehearsed her words about authenticity, echoing in rooms that never knew what that word meant. Her Instagram was a shrine to beauty and belonging, captions about family beneath pictures of our parents, always with perfect lighting and never with me. Mom spoke to her daily, their messages filled with emojis and small talk. With me, it was only logistics, bank details, reminders, forwarded updates. We hadn't had a real conversation in years. When Jasmine announced she was planning Mom's birthday dinner, the family chat lit up. Let's make it elegant. We're the Montgomerys after all, I replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. She chose Viridian, the rooftop restaurant that overlooks downtown Austin, where chandeliers hang low enough to remind you to mind your place. I didn't tell anyone that I was in the middle of transitioning roles in Washington, preparing to take a new advisory post within the National Defense Council. It felt irrelevant. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jasmine's husband, Ethan Ward, was a civilian attorney managing a contract that would soon cross my desk for approval. But that was Washington business. Family was supposed to be different. When I accepted the invitation, I expected nothing more than awkward small talk and a few polite smiles. I didn't plan to impress anyone. I just wanted to show up to exist, if only for one evening inside a family that had erased me years ago. What I forgot was that when you've lived as a soldier for too long, sometimes just showing up is enough to start a war. I arrived at Viridian at exactly 7. The restaurant glowed in shades of gold chandeliers, scattering light across sequined dresses that shimmered like fish in a glass tank. I walked in wearing my dress uniform, the silver insignia on my shoulders catching every flicker of light. The waiter froze for a moment, then whispered a quiet, "Welcome home, ma'am. Thank you for your service." His words, simple, genuine, warmed me, in a way my family's silence never did. By the time I reached the table, everyone was already seated. Jasmine sat in the center, framed in red silk and soft laughter, her hair styled into glossy perfection. She looked up and smiled wide, her voice carrying just enough for nearby tables to hear. "Well, look who brought the Pentagon to dinner." Laughter erupted around her. I smiled back. "Good to see you too, Jasmine." Mom's glance flicked across me, half pride, half unease. "At least you came on time, dear." I took the empty chair at the far end. It felt colder than it should have. Jasmine leaned toward me, her tone sweet and cutting. "I thought you'd change before coming here. You're a bit overdressed, don't you think?" Around us the guests glittered in open shoulders and champagne tones. I was the only one in navy blue high-collar polished shoes and structure. "I guess I've just gotten used to uniforms," I said quietly. "They're less confusing than trends." A few chuckles slipped out, awkward and brief, fading as quickly as they came. The conversation turned to property travel yoga retreats. I sat still, listening to words swirl around me like static. I had flown through sandstorms and coordinated evacuations, but this quiet storm of polite laughter was harder to navigate. Ethan, Jasmine's husband, turned with a practiced smile. "So, Elise, what do you actually do these days?" Before I could speak, Jasmine cut in. "Oh, she trains soldiers or something. Nothing dangerous. Logistics, maybe." She laughed, twirling her wine glass. I lifted my water, smiling faintly. "Something like that. Sometimes silence does more damage than a sharp reply." I'd learned that long ago. From across the table, a man suddenly looked up. "Wait, Elise Montgomery. You're not the same colonel who briefed Congress last year on international defense, are you?" The table froze. Jasmine laughed too loudly. "Congress? Oh, please. My sister isn't political. She just works in training." I met the man's eyes, nodded once. I briefed them on operational ethics. "Nothing exciting." A pause. The air thickened, then Jasmine's voice sliced through it again. "Anyway, did you all see my new campaign with Stella Sky?" I caught Ethan's gaze. He held it a second too long, and in that instant Jasmine's smile faltered. I turned back to the window, to the skyline glittering against the glass. Funny, I thought. At this table, I outrank everyone, and yet I've never felt smaller. The dishes arrived, the clinking of silverware, echoing like soft gunfire. I kept my posture straight, hands resting lightly in my lap. It's only dinner, I told myself, not combat. Jasmine launched into her favorite subject herself. She talked about her beauty brand, her partnerships, her mission to empower women. Every word was polished, rehearsed. Then she gestured toward me. "My sister doesn't really get it. She's not exactly a social person." I smiled. "You're right. My work's not very social. Mostly survival." The table went still for a heartbeat before Jasmine laughed too loudly and clapped her hands. "Oh, see? She's got jokes now. I didn't add anything." I'd spent years in real silence, the kind that followed explosions. I wasn't about to waste words here. Mom chimed in, tone gentle, patronizing. At least you have stability, Elise. You've always been the steady one. Steady! It sounded like praise, but it was really a dismissal. I suppose I said. It keeps planes in the air, families safe, and sometimes people alive. No one asked what I meant. They didn't realize I was speaking about more than missions. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice light. So are you a captain or a major? Before I could answer, Jasmine leaned in, smiling that careful, sugary smile. Oh, please, she's not that high up. If she were, we'd have heard about it. Laughter trickled across the table. I set my glass down, looked straight at Ethan, my voice even and quiet. Colonel, Elise Montgomery, Strategic Operations Division. Silence dropped like a curtain. A fork slipped from someone's hand, clattering against porcelain. Ethan blinked, color draining from his face. Colonel Montgomery, the 132nd Operations Division. I nodded once. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. I could see the realization in his eyes. He was waiting on my signature for the very contract he'd been handling. The air thinned. Conversations stuttered. A woman whispered, Wait! I think she was on CNN last year, about Syria. Jasmine let out a nervous laugh, too high, too sharp. Okay, can we not make this dramatic? It's just dinner. I turned to her calm. You started it with costume, remember? No shouting, no triumph, just truth clean and final. Half the table looked at me with a new kind of respect. The other half looked at Jasmine, realizing her stage had vanished. I took in their faces, the silence that now belonged to me, and said softly, Relax, everyone. I'm still just Elise. But we all knew that from that moment on, I was no longer the invisible sister. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. Every breath in that room seemed to thicken the air. Eyes clung to me, not curious, but startled, as if they were seeing someone they'd mocked come alive. Jasmine's laugh cracked too high, too brittle. Okay, everyone, this is hilarious. My sister Colonel, really. No one laughed. Ethan's stare moved between us, a calculation forming behind his eyes. From farther down the table, a man muttered, She briefed the Defense Committee. I saw her on the Pentagon feed. Jasmine's head snapped toward him, her smile collapsing. I said, Drop it. It's just dinner. I stayed calm. I didn't bring my title to the table, Jasmine. You did. The metallic clink of silverware filled the pause. My pulse stayed steady. For the first time, I wasn't orbiting their approval, they were orbiting my silence. Mom's voice trembled. We had no idea, Elise. You never asked. Heads lowered. Even the waiter lingered, nodding once quiet, but real. Jasmine tried again, voice shaking. Come on, sis. You could have told us. We'd have celebrated you. Would you? Last time I sent news, you said not to be dramatic. The light reflected in Ethan's eyes softened from surprise to respect. He exhaled. Colonel Montgomery, the 132nd Operations Division. That's you, I nodded. I've been reviewing a defense contract under your signature. The weight of truth hit like dropped metal. Jasmine turned pale. You spend your days chasing followers, I said softly. I spend mine deciding what keeps them safe. A woman across the table whispered, You led that evacuation in Syria, didn't you? We led, I said. No one survives alone. And just like that, the war I never meant to fight was over. Ethan straightened, then bowed his head slightly. Ma'am? The sound silenced the room, no clinking glasses, no laughter. Jasmine stared, stunned. What are you doing? Showing respect. Mom's eyes glistened, unsure if it was pride or shame. Sit down, Ethan. You don't have to do that. He didn't look away. The respect in his face was quiet but undeniable. A phone lit up nearby. She's on the Pentagon site, someone whispered. Screens glowed across the table faces, washed pale in their light. Jasmine's voice trembled. Okay. Everyone relax. This is embarrassing. Only for those who pretended to know me, I said softly. No shouting, no victory, just truth finally taking up space. Ethan turned to my mother. "Ma'am, your daughter commands an entire division." Mom's fingers shook around her glass. "I didn't know. I just wanted her to be happy." "You wanted me to be visible," I said. "There's a difference." Jasmine broke, then tears spilling as she stumbled from the table heels echoing on the marble floor. No one followed. The door closed behind her with a sound like final closure. I stayed seated, looking up at the chandelier light, my reflection flickering in the glass. For once, I didn't feel small. They finally looked, I thought, but I was already done waiting. I stayed seated, eyes fixed on the empty chair Jasmine had left behind. No one at the table dared to meet my gaze. The only sounds were shallow breaths, the faint clink of glass, and the soft hum of jazz weaving through the air. Light from the chandelier glimmered against the silver eagles on my shoulders. Ethan straightened his posture, calm settling over his face. "Colonel Montgomery," he said quietly. "It's an honor." "Sit down, Ethan," I replied. "We're still family here." But inside, I knew the distance between us was now permanent. One of the guests, the loudest one earlier, spoke softly. "You were in that CNN briefing last year." "I remember." Another nodded. "You talked about women in command." Mom's voice trembled. "I just didn't know she was this." I smiled faintly. "You raised me to be disciplined, Mom. I guess I followed through." No one laughed. The room, once filled with noise, now breathed in careful silence. The respect in their eyes wasn't admiration. It was disbelief that someone they'd dismissed had been above them all along. Jasmine returned, eyes red, voice fragile. "You could have told me. I wouldn't have mocked you if I'd known." "If you needed to know to be kind," I said softly, "then the kindness wasn't real." Mom's tears fell. "Elise, can we start over?" "I'm not angry," I said, "just tired of starting over." I stood straight in my jacket, and no one stopped me. Those who'd laughed lowered their heads. Those who'd ignored me looked away. As I walked out, the jazz shifted to "Fly Me to the Moon." For once, I thought I don't need to fly anywhere. I've already landed. I stepped out onto the balcony. Austin glowed beneath me, the city lights crossing one another like a net of gold, sharp, deliberate, endless. The wind carried the dry scent of lavender from somewhere below, cool against my face, cleansing. My phone buzzed. "Jasmine." I let it ring. Then Mom. Then Jasmine again. The screen lit, then went dark. They're not calling because they understand, I thought. They're calling because they're caught off guard. The realization made me smile, not bitterly, just softly, as if something inside me had finally settled. I remembered what an old officer once told me. The mark of a real leader isn't how loud she speaks, but how steady she stays when no one listens. Maybe I learned that lesson not from the military, but right here from the silence of people who were supposed to love me. The door behind me opened. Ethan stepped out, keeping a careful distance. His tone was steady, but low. "Colonel, I'm sorry for earlier. I didn't know who you were." "You knew who I was," I said quietly. "You just didn't think it mattered." He nodded, shame written plainly across his face. "Jasmine, she didn't mean harm. She's just raised to believe applause means love." I interrupted. "And I was raised to believe silence means strength. Both of us were wrong, I think." He bowed his head. "Good night, ma'am." "Good night, Ethan." The door closed gently behind him. I exhaled, and for the first time in years, the breath didn't hurt. I walked down the marble steps and out into the street. My heels clicked in steady rhythm, echoing across the pavement. Each step felt lighter, like shedding the weight I had carried long after I stopped needing to prove I could. I drove out of downtown, the skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror until it became a blur of gold and gray. The radio hummed low until the anchor's voice broke through the static. "Colonel Elise Montgomery has been appointed as senior advisor to the National Defense Council." A quiet laugh slipped out before I could stop it. No one at home knew. Maybe tomorrow Jasmine would see it trending on Twitter, or Mom would overhear it in her book club. It didn't matter anymore. I didn't need them to know. I didn't need anyone to call me Colonel. I reached up and removed my cap, placing it gently on the seat beside me. The headlights stretched across the highway ribbons of white that shimmered on the windshield like the trails I used to watch from a cockpit. For once, I thought I wasn't returning from war. I was heading home. The wind slipped through the cracked window, cool against my skin. I turned the volume up. A slow jazz tune filled the car, soft, deliberate, forgiving. They had mocked the uniform, never realizing it was the only armor that kept me human. I smiled and kept driving into the dark, no longer the soldier returning, just the woman, finally free from the need to be seen, 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 from the need to be seen.